Welcome to the next edition of Grid Forward Forum. I'm Bryce Yonker. Today we have with us two leading experts on energy supply chains, Will Parrish and Stephen White from Power Engineers. Gentlemen, thanks for being on.
Hi, happy to be here.
Well, why don't I start with you, Will? Maybe you can just do a quick introduction of yourself and what brought you into this current role.
Yeah, not a problem. So I graduated college, went through ROTC, got commissioned as an officer in the United States Army. Did about 10 years there. When I got out, I was looking for what to do next. An Army buddy of mine said I should come work in this industry because there's plenty of work and there's lots of gaps that needs filling. So I went to go work for a company in the industry back in 2008. And it just so happened to be doing supply chain. So just about since 2008, I've been working supply chain, whether it's up at the PO level or whether it's in the field doing materials management, all the way up until what we're doing today. Had a lot of experience with a lot of different utilities.
Thanks, Will. And over to you, Stephen.
Sure. So the beginning of my tale is very similar to Will's. College, ROTC, military. When I left the military, I actually went back to school, lived over in Europe for a little bit, got a different viewpoint on things. But when I came back, I immediately went into the supply chain, just not in this industry. While I was there, I learned quite a bit. It was very interesting, but then the opportunity of coming into this industry arose. And that's actually the same time period, 2012, when Will and I first met. And from there, we worked alongside each other, building out several different supply chain material management organizations and advisory service organizations. And a little bit, that's pretty much what we're doing here at Power. We provide support, not only on the procurement and supply chain side, but we also provide advice and recommendations on how to restructure things in order to improve the capabilities of utilities.
Great. We're not going to really ease our way into this discussion. We're just going to go right into it. And to say supply chains are dynamic is far too polite of a status, right? There's quite a mess that's been unfolding and still is unfolding these last couple of years. So maybe we'll just start over the last few years. The availability of critical grid components has been shifting around. What's driving that? Maybe one of you guys can start, and then one of you guys can talk about what is particularly problematic still as far as in the overall space.
Yeah, sure. So, we could take a look at a bunch of different things that are kind of hitting us at the same time. We almost have like a convergence of variables that are driving this. It's easy to point at COVID because that did disrupt many different aspects of supply chain in many different industries. I think one of the unique things in this particular industry is the fact that during COVID and just after COVID, we had a lot of consolidation of vendors that took place. So, if we were playing textbook MBA stuff right now, we'd probably be talking about a constrained marketplace where the manufacturers and vendors actually hold the leverage when it comes to negotiations. The second thing that I would say is we're also as we can see, we slowed down with COVID, but then it's not like it was a slow ramp up. Between the data centers, the load projections that are out there, as well as aging infrastructure, all of a sudden, it's kind of just letting the horses out of the gate. And you started seeing a huge amount of demand for these different pieces of equipment. With that being said, you may have had some consolidation. The capacity stayed the same, but we are exceeding and have exceeded the capacity of many of the manufacturers and vendors that are out there. You combine that with the raw goods shortages that you have our seasonal issues here in the United States with weather impacting us. You have personnel shortages, both in the utilities and at the vendor locations, or I should say manufacturing locations. So we have all these different things that are kind of coming together to kind of set the stage for us having these issues that are taking place, at least from a high macro level perspective.
Anything else on drivers?
Yeah, drivers. I think you named one of the first precursors to COVID, kind of put a damper on it. But the other drivers, so less competitors are now in the market, which then obviously puts you in a position of having less people to push an RFP out to, therefore driving up costs. And then on top of that, the barriers to entrance for new vendors is also becoming quite a bit higher, especially around specialized material. Whether you're looking at Buy America or any number of other constraints that can come onto that. So those are all big pieces. The last one is competition. Right now, the competition is quite fierce when it comes to a lot of these engineered materials. Specifically, just for example, as we talk about transmission lines, you are seeing projects that get under contract that get negotiated agreements on scheduled timelines with manufacturers, and then you start still seeing delays just because their capacity is outstripped by the sheer demand that's coming from a lot of large scale projects that were in a way held back during COVID and are now all hitting essentially a critical mass and kind of getting ready for shovels in the ground execution all around the same time.
Can we layer in some of the dynamics from a global perspective here? Because I know that, a lot of the dynamics that unfolded with COVID were around global supply chains, these incentives, these Buy America requirements, throw wrinkles in it related to international markets, the tariffs. I know we'll probably talk about that, impact flow of supplies across borders. How are these international dynamics playing into the supply chains for critical grid components right now?
I would say negatively. Before we jump into whether it's IRA or the Advanced Manufacturing Protection Tax Credit, or even the newest bill that came out, the Electrical Supply Chain Act. Let's talk about some of the things that just kind of pop up when you have this surge in demand, right? So the first thing is port management. We've seen the ports be problematic. So it's not just our industry, right? The ports are overloaded with everybody's stuff that wants to get in. So you're going to have additional delays potentially at the port, depending on how good your freight forwarder is or how good the transportation person is or company is. So you have that. You have trucking shortages. I mean, there's container shortages that are out there. So just getting it into a container and getting it on a vessel is problematic. You have trucking shortages in the United States. So just getting truckers to get it out of port, to a transfer facility, unload it to a bed, get it to a project site. Those are all causing problems. And then it's something that we don't really think about very much, but diesel price has gone up significantly, and that's going to affect both your ocean freight as well as your trucking. You have these different items, these different variables that are kind of hitting at this point in time because of the disruption we've had in the past. So, when we're talking to our clients, right, and we're talking about what are the things we can control, right? So there's, anything governmental, we really can't control that. We can try to put some risk mitigation in for it, but you can't necessarily control it, right? Because we're not driving that. But if you are going with an overseas vendor or at least an outside United States vendor, having a solid logistics plan to get it in and to get it to project site is one of the key components and often overlooked. It's usually not put into purchase orders. It's usually not negotiated as part of MSA agreements. It's kind of one of those things where, hey, they need to bring it to site. Well, if we're not proofing the lane and finding those particular issues before you start bringing the items in, that's when you're going to find that those last second delays, which of course affect schedule and budget.
Right. Stephen, I'll kick this next one to you. Delivery for critical grid components, more than a couple of them, remain stubbornly long. So maybe you can highlight, where those issues are really remaining, a concern.
Sure.
And maybe even ones that aren't the top of the list, but are still longer than maybe we were used to before a few years ago. Substation parts, transformer, turbines. These are the obvious ones, but maybe you can just start running through that list as far as where those are at.
Yeah, let's talk about the first one you talked about, your transformers, your turbines, your large scale, very design heavy engineered products, right? A lot of those is one, we go back to capacity. Two, you got to realize there's multiple parts to this. It's not all manufacturer led. One of the other pieces that plays into this is the planning and the design component of that. So as projects are still in the early stages and in its early stages of development and design, any delays in those just further prolong. Even if you get a vendor under contract, that's only the first step. So then you have to kind of get to the design process, move all the way through those things. And most of us are right now thinking, oh, that's relatively straightforward. We understand our payment terms. We'll get through it. It's not always the case. There are always countless projects that have delays around the design components. Additionally, you're just facing an issue with capacity and then a combination of capacity and approved vendors, right? So pretty much all utilities have a laundry list of approved vendors. Generally, you're going to see the usual suspects for the various products, and everybody will generally have that approved. But what you're seeing now with utilities is you see an aggressive push, and you did see this coming out of COVID, for expanding the approved vendors list. One area I remember coming out of COVID that was really big was actually distribution transformers. There was just a severe shortage, and you had utilities basically trying to barter with other utilities to get pieces and then other utilities looking further afield to parts of the world that they haven't really ever explored for manufacturers to identify new materials. So really it comes down to capacity. That is the big driving force. And the thing is that we also have to remember here in the US, like the market for these engineered products and growing capacity when it comes to generation or transmission, it's worldwide. We're not the only customer in town. You have Southeast Asia, which is heavily pushing into more transmission, more delivery, more generation to increase those capabilities. And then you have the Middle East, you have Europe that is looking for continued reliability and increases in capacity, no different than the US. So everybody is competing over the same limited resources, and that's a big driving factor.
Well, maybe you can keep pulling the thread a little bit further. Are we making progress on substation component delivery time, whether it's transmission or distribution transformers, or is this stuff getting better, getting worse? Where are our lead times? What might you add to that list, right? Because I think people know what's at the very top of it, but what else is also just being longer than it needs to be?
Sure. I just wanted to piggyback real quick on capacity. So one of the biggest things, the utilities have a push for the vendors or the manufacturers to increase capacity, right? I think one of the reasons why the manufacturers are holding back from opening new plants or opening up another service line or anything like that is because it takes about 7 to 10 years to break even on that. And so, is this a spike in demand and are things going to go down? They don't have a view of that, right? The utilities have that view. They're the ones that are putting the planning together. They're the ones that are coordinating with the RTOs. Those are ones with the Department of Energy, all those sort of things. So it's really a matter of the vendors don't have the confidence that is this a spike or is this continuing to go up or is this going to plateau? They know what has been published when a new project's been announced, but that doesn't mean your grid resiliency or your hardening efforts, those don't hit the newspapers, those don't hit the websites, right? So it's one of those things where they're unsure of where this is taking us. To continue on with pulling that thread, for instance, when you look to the government initiatives that took place, right? So like under the Biden administration there, I think in the last year or two, I can't remember the exact year, right? But, they pledged that they were going to open up for transformers, right? So it was a big push to say, hey, we recognize this. We're going to reduce some of the efforts that get it in the country. Make it easier to go to foreign suppliers, things of that nature, because domestically we can't meet the need, right? So they did relax that, and they did promise that they were going to send, release money through the Department of Energy in order to try to offset some of these things. Now, of course, we had a presidential election. We have a new administration. Those funds weren't released. So, what we were counting on as having some type of relief to allow us to go out and get these other vendors that Steve spoke about is kind of, again, we're put on the back burner. It's not necessarily something that we can go and do because those promises haven't come through. I would say if we're continuing down this path, a lot of the, like for instance, it would be great if the Inflation Reduction Act had the same effect on transformers that it's having in the solar battery market, right? So now you're seeing companies invest a great amount of money. I thought I saw like $140 million were being invested in standing up manufacturing plants for solar batteries here, right? And one of the things that they get out of the IRA is they do get a tax credit for that. But they're not even looking at meeting the supply that's projected until 2035. So even with the investment and opening up, new facilities or new lines, you're not going to see that until 5 or 7 years down the road before it actually impacts the market that we're at. That's why, again, Steve and I are big proponents of we need to look at this as the new normal. So how do we look internally to say, how can we get some type of look ahead to the vendors that they can actually use to start planning their processes, what kind of alliances or partnerships can be made, if there's the ability to do a down payment and reserve manufacturing slots, those types of things. A lot of the different problems or issues or obstacles that we're seeing, we're advising, hey, this is the new normal for right now, because even with all of these initiatives, even with everything that's coming, you're not going to see any type of relief for several years down the road. And we can't wait for that. So what can we do internally so that we can help the vendors plan far enough ahead so that it's less of an impact for ourselves?
The last thing I want to add is, and we kind of touched on it, but it's that justification for development and really increasing capacity. or really incentivizing vendors to really bring up their capabilities, right? That incentive isn't fully there. Each of the various partner utilities are out there, are all speaking about whatever their plan is or whatnot. But due to the same constraints that these utilities face, with adverse rate cases or having to pass on a lot through their various public utility commission, and then that getting passed on to customers, and then customers pushing back against, additional increases beyond that one, you're seeing, while big work is being done, you're also seeing work constantly being planned for 1 year and then pushed to the right. And that right there adds a level of risk and volatility to the manufacturers, which then tamp down on their resolve to essentially put a substantial amount of capital investment into developing more capacity.
So let's back ourselves up a little bit. We'll see how far we can get in our time to some of the more the components that are going into these finished goods. Tariffs seem to be a little bit more durable around aluminum, steel, wood. Some of these areas, they've been kind of all over the board on some other more country-specific outcomes. But, those are the main components for mini grid products, poles, conductor, cross arms, everything. So what sort of an impact are you seeing from that standpoint? And then I have some other areas I wanted to explore as well.
Just a quick comment on that, then I know we can add it back and forth and expand on it. But with what we're seeing a lot of the time when it comes to the material and I guess the tariffs, and let's talk about that. We are already seeing on some projects where you're having vendors that you already have under contract tied to various price per unit and whatnot, pushing back against those prices or coming back and saying they can no longer hold on to those. So essentially almost using the tariffs as a force majeure justification. That is already starting to be seen. Now, granted, it'll go through its own level of negotiation, and whether it stands, it'll be a case-by-case basis on project and every different utility and manufacturer's different contract specific situation. But we are already starting to see them hit a break point to where they are pushing back against it.
Anything else to add on that, Will?
No, they're pushing back. We've seen several, I wouldn't call them failed bid events, but it's a bid event and, you selected who you wanted and you started moving forward with it. And you're already seeing during the negotiations, the pushback that come through. I would also say you're starting to see that as the number of declines in your bid events. So if you're hosting an RFP, whatever that's for, whether it's an MSA or whether you're doing a project specific, be ready for vendors to either push back after you started negotiations, or more importantly, just decline to bid.
Can we talk a little bit about some of the other component parts? There was a lot of coverage about chips, right? The electronic chips that are in almost everything that's digitized these days. Is that a similar level of concern as it was? Has it leveled off? Is it equally difficult to get those chips? Where's that at?
So I believe it is just as equally difficult for those chips now for our industry than it was. I would say it's probably equal to 2023 at this point in time. So this material, these pieces of equipment, this is a very niche. If you look at the industry itself, the numbers that are needed, right? It's kind of niche. If we compare it to the fact that, every computer that's bought or sold, every car that's bought or sold, right? So, when it came for demand for chips, and we've all seen, the big push to bring manufacturing to the United States still hasn't come to fruition. I know that they're trying, right? But we don't have a successful plant operating and pushing these things out. So with that being said, we're kind of the last to kind of see any type of availability come through, just because, if I was a chip manufacturer, where would I send my products to, right? So this is kind of one of the last industries that's being served. So it's just as hard to get a hold of those.
Steve, I'll send this one to you. Maybe I'll call it soft components. I don't know how you guys describe it, but software, services, the other pieces that go into a delivered product, obviously the instrumentation or the deployment of that product. Where are you all seeing, prices and availability for these pieces of it coming into place?
So less instrumentation. I think that ties a little bit more specifically into what Will just responded. But let's focus on service and software, right? Because that is a big part of delivering projects. Hell, it even plays into the actual construction individuals, people that are building and putting this together. I would say, depending on what you're looking for, there are some where it's widely available. I'd say in software, the market is ripe with products and solutions out there that are being leveraged that weren't there, I would say, even 10 years ago in a quality way. Like there was maybe one or two players. You had a couple of the big ERP companies like SAP and Oracle trying to kick things out that were useful. But it was more limited. Now you're seeing a volume of different solutions out there, which is a good thing. When it comes to some of the professional services, generally, at least when it's being contracted, I think there is a decent availability internally being able to be retained inside of utility. I find it's actually with a lot of the utility clients that we work with, I feel that they are struggling with retaining the top talent they need. But then when it comes to construction and construction service, I feel like we are in a situation that we have been quite limited for some time, and the demand for construction crews, the technical capabilities, is actually quite a bit higher than the availability. And so now you're seeing a tactic of several of the utility partners we work with working aggressively to get vendors under contract even earlier than when they used to. A lot of the times in a typical design bid build or one of those models that's not an EPC, that you usually aim to try to get your packets out, get your RFP out to a construction contractor in that 60% and up engineering phase. Honestly, ideally 90%. You are now seeing some utilities push to get them on even earlier, knowing that there's going to be a lot more unknowns that have to be accepted and built into the contract just to lock down capacity.
Well, I'm not going to take you guys back all the way to the mines, although check out our Volt Rush podcast. That was like 2 years ago, and I think is still just as relevant now. Let's pivot a little bit over to some of the policy related areas. So the Buy America requirements from the past packages, the foreign entities of concern that were mentioned in recent packages. How are these things playing out? How are they impacting supply chains? How are they impacting project certainty? Maybe I'll let you start on that, Will.
So I would say it's significantly impacting us. So, we already talked about the fact that we had some consolidation with vendors. Now, with these different programs, you're starting to take some of those vendors off the list, or at least exploring new vendors that may be in other countries that we haven't seen before. So this goes back to, we have a narrow list to begin with, and we're now narrowing that list even more so. So from a perspective of what the impact is you're forcing all of the demand for the United States through an even more a limited number of vendors, which is going to run into capacity issues. I mentioned it before. We could go into it in depth. I'm actually hoping that with HR 3638, that if they do complete the survey and it is beneficial, that what they're going to find is the fact that we need to have some relief around these two programs. Whether it's considered critical, or whether whatever designation that needs to be put on it, but we need to be able to open the door to certify new vendors to bring to the marketplace. And right now we're being hamstrung by these initiatives.
Maybe I can toss a little bit of a different type of a question in here, which is one of the kind of the macro drivers around the industry, which is this resilience topic, right? The operators are kind of having to deal with all things all at once, and they don't know what they're going to have to face other than something significant, likely. So how does this interface between the operators and their suppliers when they're having a hard time understanding exactly what they're going to need? How do you guys see this playing out right now? And is there areas where more assurances or more certainty can help stabilize the kind of the supply of the critical components that they're going to need when they need them?
Well, I think the biggest thing that needs to happen is, quite frankly, the utilities have pre-COVID for the longest time worked in kind of a just-in-time, where they're not holding the inventory on their books, right? So there was a lot of like, hey, we don't want to have it sit for years and years and years until we can consume it, so it becomes a tax liability, so on and so forth. But the just-in-time philosophy of supply chain really, for at least the foreseeable future, really needs to go away. We need to shift that around and start looking at what the possibility of actually being able to forecast some demand. The demand really only has to be 30 to 50% correct. Like when you're looking at long-term planning, for vendors to be able to understand, hey, when's it coming? When's it going to be needed? Things like that. I think the for the specifically designed pieces of equipment, so transformers, like substation components, turbines, things of that nature. Really, quite frankly, standardization is, as much as everybody hates talking about standardization of design would really help the vendors out from a manufacturing perspective. So when it comes to looking at resiliency and what's needed around that, we know we can't predict Mother Nature. Fully understandable. But what we can do is we could do some things internally that would help the vendors respond quicker. Because a lot of the times the vendors are they're, as Steve and I like to call it, react to contact, right? They're all of a sudden they're hit with a phone call and we need to start rapidly moving instead of saying, hey, how can we put together push packages? What can we do for, increasing stock levels? How can we as a team or as maybe some type of alliance venture put together an itemized list or at least subcomponents of items to move forward. And then lastly, I'd say it's like, if we standardize the design, it's going to go a lot quicker when it comes to the back and forth with the vendors. But I think those are the two things that utilities could really focus on to kind of alleviate some of these things.
Granted, this is probably not going to happen anytime soon. And obviously standards across the country and amongst the various utilities, especially older areas of the country, are vastly different. But anything that can be done, especially around, let's just say, the large, big ticket items, anything that can be done to start the process of standardizing that more broadly, whether it's in a region or across the country, which I don't think that'll be happening anytime soon. The more that can be done like that, what you do is you also provide a relief valve for the manufacturers. Most of the time, just as an example, since we've used the word we've used transformers as an example several times. Oftentimes, you always see on a substation, you see two pads. You see where the transformer's at, and usually see a spare sitting on a separate pad, right? What about those what-if scenarios of something, going wrong at another site and they desperately need another one, but manufacturers have no capacity? If there was broader standardization in different areas, there'd be the ability for the utilities to call on other partner utilities to buy material directly from them as needed. But because everything is quite unique from area to area outside of maybe minor hardware-based materials, that becomes very difficult.
Costly distribution upgrades, frequent extreme weather events, demand surging from an onslaught of distributed energy resources adoption. Do these challenges sound familiar? If so, you need Virtual Peaker's cloud-based distributed energy platform. We're empowering modern utilities with next-generation virtual power plant solutions to maximize the value of DERs. The Virtual Peaker platform unifies all aspects of DER management, from DERMS to customer engagement and demand forecasting. Learn more at virtual-peaker.com.
I didn't tell you guys we're going to do this, but let's try a little bit of a rapid fire here. Probably think more about lead time as much as anything, but if you want to talk about something else that's being a problem to deliver it, like it spiked in price, but you can still get it reasonably quickly. Really, I just want to know 1 to 10, right? 1 being, oh yeah, that's not a problem. We can still get that stuff, no problem, and it's a reasonable price. And 10 being, wow, this is bad, like really bad, about as bad as I've ever seen. I'm just going to give you guys 10. If you want to really disagree with each other, go for it, but I'll bounce back and forth between you. Will, let's start with you first. Large transformers.
I'd say that's a 9 or a 10.
Okay. I'm gonna go, and then Steve, I'm going to go to you with more of the distribution size transformers.
I'm going to go with, we're probably in the 6 to 7 region. It's getting better. It was bad. It was more 9, 10 coming out of COVID.
Back over to you, Will. Conduit, like literal wire.
So wire or conduit?
Yeah, either or both.
So conduit, 9 times out of 10, that stuff is easy to get a hold of. So I'd say that's a 1 or a 2. Right?
Okay.
We don't have a lot of issues with that. Now, I mean, from a wire perspective, I'd say you're moving into the 5 or 6 range.
Interesting. Steve, poles.
Wood or steel?
Yeah.
Let's go wood first and then steel.
Wood, 4 or 5. Steel, demand's really high on that. I'm going to go, we're 6 and up, 6, 7. And a lot will come down just to luck of the draw timing when you engage a vendor and what they have on the plate.
All right. Well, switch gear.
Probably a 7
Interesting.
right now. I would say 138 and below would probably go into like a 4 or 5. You start going to 345 and above from a transmission perspective. That's when you're going to be starting to get into issues.
Will, I mean, breakers or any other smaller component pieces, anything in particular that stands out there that you give a number to?
So I would say for substations, you got to look real hard at your aluminum bus, and you got to look at all your fittings. So those are not only tariff imposed, right? But you've also seen, I think it was I thought I saw 50 or maybe 75% increase over the last 3 years. So those are getting hard to get a hold of. Even if we're just talking about the squeeze on dead end shoes or even splices in the transmission line world, those are hard to get a hold of.
All right, Steve, you get a fun one. Turbines. I know it's a big category, but
It is a huge category. But I'm gonna stick it around 7 right now. I mean, and more broadly, I mean, turbines, depending on the type of turbines, we're talking generation-based, wind-based turbines or whatnot. There's a variety of different situations of what's impacting them. But I would say you're pretty much looking at that region. The biggest thing I can say around turbines is plan ahead accordingly. And the further you plan ahead, the better the situation's going to be. But yeah, they take some time. I don't think it's as bad of a situation as like what Will laid out for transmission level transformers, because everybody wants one or wants many of them.
this is a big class, Will, but sensors, monitors, meters.
Ooh.
To tell you the truth, what I have seen, even if you go down to like the AMI stuff that the smart meters that you're putting on houses, I mean, like you're able to get a hold of those. I would say those are probably in the 3 to 4 range, to tell you the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Instrumentation is usually not so much of an issue. Yes, there may be some chip items in there, but I have not seen any type of major issue with those. I've seen lead times go up by 5 or 6 weeks, but again, if you're planning far enough ahead, I haven't really seen those things fluctuate too much.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, I'll head over to you. I know this is less physical, but let's just lump in software systems in general and what it takes to make them a reality.
Software systems, obtaining the software.
Yeah.
1, 2, making them a reality. So configuring software. That's going to be up in the 7 region, and that's not going to be driven by actual developers, designers. It's probably going to be driven mostly by the process of developing, implementing any sort of software solution. Often has, let's just say, a lot of individuals in a room. And so that getting a consensus to providing an output that actually works can be quite a trying experience. And I'd liken it to what everybody hates in the corporate world, which is, hey, we're changing our ERP system. Basically, that's the kiss of death. Having gone through it several times, you have oceans of stakeholders from various different departments involved in it. Everybody needs one little thing changed here, there, and everywhere. And guess what? The output then comes and you're like, it's going to be great. And it's not. And then you're going through years and years of revisions. So granted, this isn't an ERP situation, but it is a situation that has a lot of consensus requirements to get it in line. So I'd say getting the software, short, doing the other stuff, not necessarily as easy.
Well, and I've got another less physical one for you, and I'll just lump it as engineering services.
Good one.
So I would say engineering services right now. Ooh, that's tough. So I'm going to say that's at a 5 or 6. And the reason I'm going to say that is just the personnel requirements that are needed. Right. So I don't want to put any sharp edges around this, but let's just say, like to get a designer to stand by themselves and be able to, execute a design coming out of college, it's probably 3 or 5 years. So you can get bodies, but the problem that you have is the experience levels that are out there. The demand has just grown so large for the need that it's not necessarily something that the engineering companies have ramped up for. It's not like you have a lot of people sitting on the bench ready to go, let alone a lot of qualified, experienced, which is probably more important than anything else, individuals who are ready to go.
The capable people are very busy right now.
Yeah.
Steve, did I miss anything that's over a 5 that you can think of?
Ooh.
Or Will, did I miss anything? I mean, I tried to cover most of the main areas, but if it's not a problem, we don't need to cover it.
So I will say porcelain insulators, believe it or not. So in the transmission and substation world, we've seen a significant jump and lead times for porcelain or glass insulators. Polymers, easy to get a hold of. That's not so much of an issue. But we have seen a couple actually projects delayed because of the availability of glass or porcelain insulators.
Wow. Down all the way there. All right, this will be our last question. You were chatting, Will. I'll let you go first. You get the last word. And take it however far you want. I think the further we go, the more uncertainty that we have. But maybe looking out over the next year or 2 or 3, do you think critical supply chains are getting better, will get better? Are there areas that could get worse even from where we're at now? I'll let you start, Will, and then Steve, you can finish this up.
Let's take any type of government initiatives out of this, simply because we really don't know what's coming down the pike. With that being said, I would say over the next 2 years, we're going to see it. We're going to see it steady. I don't think necessarily that we're going to get extremely worse to the point where it's just unfeasible to execute projects. But I think that the reality that we're living in right now is the normal. So I would sit there and say that we're probably going to stay the same for the next 2 years. Maybe we'll see some type of relief when it comes to, more suppliers, or whether or not we have manufacturers that are opening up. But that, again, 5 to 7 years to see an impact there. So I think we're in it right now. And I think it's going to be this way for a while.
There's not a whole lot to add to that. I do. Will and I are pretty much on the same page with this. We really are. This is the new normal. This is the reality. There are going to have to be fundamental things that change if we're looking on the supply side over the next 5 to 7 years or whatnot, to, I guess, increase the availability of stuff, to shrink the amount of time people have to wait to get some of these different goods that they need to deliver their projects. The only other place that really is in the power of the customer, and the utility in this case, is really working on their side from the planning and the design side. So it's moving that to the left, starting sooner on that, providing more clarity, being willing to buy material at an earlier stage than maybe they used to, and also shifting away from the just-in-time model, as Will mentioned. All those things will alleviate the situation to where customers can deliver in this new normal. But those are really the steps that need to start happening, and a shift away from the pre-COVID, era of thought process when it comes to supply chain.
Will Parrish, Stephen White, thanks for being on with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Forward Forum, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.